Hello and welcome to our ClassWiz familiarization webinar, where we'll be looking at the changes to the layout and functionality for the new range of ClassWiz models. So to begin with, comparing the old 991 to 991CW, for example, you can see that the layout has changed considerably. And this is deliberate, such that the range has the same layout. So the 83, 85 and 991 all have the same layout. Buttons are in the same place. The menu structure, which is new, is the same, such that if you can pick and use one device, you can then use all of them. So the idea is that transition between the handsets is seamless. With regards to the new layout, only the essential keys have been retained, such that there is a simplified layout a little bit. So, for example, the buttons are less cluttered with secondary features. Again, it does make it slightly easier to use. Having a look at the control keys, you can see that on has been repositioned ever so slightly. Now it's also a little bit recessed, such that it will hopefully prevent any accidental use. We have a new home key. So this is where you would access your mode or app. Notice from the home screen on the new handset, there is no numerical shortcut available for the modes. So you have to choose them by scrolling, but there is a new page scroll feature available to make life a little bit easier for you. There is a new location for the shift key, and it's colored ever so slightly. So this is how you access the secondary function from each labeled key. There is only one modifier now, though, so alpha has been removed, and that functionality is now within the new menu structure. The scroll keys have been redesigned and improved, such that we now have a page scroll as well. And within the scroll keys, you get the OK key, which is new. And this is essentially where you would confirm your settings, but it is also how you can interchange its use with execute as well. There is a new back key. Now, this is a menu return function, so you can move up a level in a menu, but you can also use AC if you want to close a whole menu without selecting anything, as before. A new settings key. Now, this is the equivalent to shift and setup, where it's got additional menus as well, such that you can enter your system settings, such as contrast, but also how you access reset. Just to demonstrate that, you can see on the 8385 emulator, if I enter calculate with OK, and then use settings, I get the menu where I've got calculate settings, system or reset. If I scroll down to reset and choose with OK, I get the three options that I'm used to. So resetting the data, the variable, or everything. I scroll down to initialize all and choose OK. It asks me if this is what I want to do. I confirm with OK, and it resets. Moving on to our new keys. This is our first one. It is the variable key. And it replaces both the store and recall functionality from the previous handsets, so enabling easier storing of values and their recall. We have a new function key, which is really exciting. So this is an example of the upgraded functionality. So this allows you to define and evaluate functions and even composites as well. And I'll demonstrate that later on. We have a new catalog key, which is where you would access your historic commands, symbols, and functions, such as calculus. And finally, we have tools, which is mostly undo. However, it is app specific. So the options presented change depending upon what you are attempting to do. And I'll show you that as well. But if we move on, let's have a look at the functionality of the handsets. So here we have an equation 3 to the power x equals 13. So if I enter calculate, you can see that we still have that log AB button on the 8385. If I enter log base 3 and scroll to the right of 13, you will notice that the screen, the contrast is changed between your function and the data that you have just entered. If I evaluate with execute, I get my value. But of course, there is the alternative method of using the fraction. So that's been slightly relocated, so it is above the sign key now. Using log AB again, so let's choose log base 10, for example. Scroll to the right of 13, scroll down, log AB again of 10, scroll to the right of 3, and execute. So nice, straightforward and familiar ways of performing calculation. But there is an alternative way of approaching this. And you can do that by using catalog, for example. So within calculate, you can choose catalog. And this shows you the menu available to access your functionality. So functional analysis, probability, numeric calculations, and angles, for example. At this point, if you wanted to investigate, say, probability, we could scroll down and choose with OK. So percentages, factorials, permutations, combinations, and the scroll on the right tells us that I can scroll down further. Using page scroll, it scrolls to the bottom of the available menu. And you can see I also have random numbers and random integers available. If I scroll to choose random integers and select with OK, I can now produce random integers, say perhaps between 1 and 52, if I was choosing cards from a deck of cards. So I can enter 1, and then a comma is required, and that is the secondary function of the close parenthesis. So it's moved position, 52, and then close parentheses again. When I execute, I get my random integers. If I wanted to return to my functional analysis, I can go to catalog again. And if I choose OK, you can see that I reach the logarithmic menu. So log AB, base 10, and natural logs. So choosing log AB with OK, I can do log base 3 of 13 as before and execute to achieve the value. Okay. Moving on to basic trig values now. So to evaluate sine of pi over 3. If I change the emulator from the 8385, just quickly, I'm now using the 991CW emulator. Enter calculate, but I will produce reset it just ever so quickly. So settings, just to make sure that there are no surprises. So I've now reset. And if I want to perform a trig evaluation, you can see that the handset layout is exactly the same. Sine is where you would expect it to be. Using the fraction key, I can enter pi over 3. Now that is shift and 7 for the symbol pi, scroll down to enter 3, scroll to the right, and I am required to close the parentheses here for trig functions. And then when I evaluate with execute, I get the value. Notice the default degree of accuracy, but it's not the value that I would be expecting. Okay. At this point, however, you've probably noticed that the reason for that is that the default measure of angle for the 991 is in fact degrees. So if I would actually like to get the right value, I've got a couple of options. I can have a go at changing the settings. So if I choose settings and then choose that with OK, you can see I get the expected options where I can change the input-output method. So I can choose OK. Currently, default is math in, math out. If I would like a decimal as a calculation result, math in, decimal out could be chosen. I can use the back key to go back up a menu level. And if I scroll down to angle and select that with OK, I get 3 radio buttons where I can choose degree, radian, or gradians. Scrolling down to radian, I can choose that. And then if I go back to my calculation, then when I execute again, and notice the R at the top of the screen now, I'll get the value that I would expect, okay, especially when dealing with radians. Again, there is something else that we could try. You could attempt to use catalog as an alternative instead. So what I will do is I will scroll left to try and replay this calculation. And if I choose catalog now, you will notice that there are angle choices available. If I scroll down to angle and then select with OK, again, we have degrees, radians, gradians. If I choose radians and select with OK, you can see that I haven't changed the settings on the handset, but I am telling the calculator that at this point, pi over 3 is a measurement in radians. So if I hadn't changed into radians and I was still in degrees, the alternative would be to just enter the little R symbol for radians, and calculating would give me the correct value. Next thing we can have a look at is defining a function. So here we have a quadratic, x squared subtract 2x subtract 3. And I am interested in what the derivative is. What I can do is now use the function key. And you can see here that I can recall f of x or even define f of x. I'd like to have a go at defining f of x as my quadratic. So if I scroll down and choose with OK, I can now enter x squared. So the variable x has moved position. And then square, subtract 2x, and subtract 3. And then I can confirm with execute. And at this point, what I could also do is have a go at defining g of x as the derivative function. So choosing the function button again and scrolling down to define g of x. Now I can differentiate it and enter the linear function 2x subtract 2 directly. But at this point, you're probably thinking, well, maybe I could define g of x in terms of f of x as well. So what you could actually do is, for example, you could enter composite functions using the function key again. Now, as I'm defining g of x, when I use the function button, I can only then recall f of x. So I can recall f of x and then, for example, subtract 2. So you can see that this is now 2 times f of x, subtract 2. But more interestingly, additionally, what I could try to do is define g of x as the differential. And I can do that quite easily by using catalog. If I use catalog and functional analysis, you can see that this menu is very similar to the 83, 85 menu options available. If I use page scroll, you can actually see that the log choices are still available. So the menu structure is the same or very similar across the handsets. I can choose derivative as the first entry in my menu. And now I could actually differentiate my function at x. Now I could enter the quadratic x squared subtract 2x subtract 3, but there is the potential for error in entry at this point. So I can also use the function key. So again, using f of x, scrolling right at x, allows me to define g of x as the derivative of f of x. Okay. And the reason that may be of use is because the next thing we can have a look at is actually evaluating f of x and f dash of x. Normally would have done this within tables, so let's have a look at that. Choose home. Now on the home menu, you can see that distribution and equation, for example, have been promoted, so they're more clearly visible on the default home screen. Using page scroll, I can scroll all the way down through the menu choices, and I can scroll back up as well. Scrolling down and across to table, select with OK, and I get to my default screen where I have x, f of x, and g of x. If I wanted to define the table range, I now choose Tools. And this is where I can enter the range. Additionally, this is where you can also define f of x and g of x as before on the previous model handset. And I can change the table type to just f of x, just g of x, or both. The table range I can access with OK. And maybe I would like values to go from a negative to a positive. So the negative is shift and subtract. Let's say go from -5 to 5. Confirm OK, and then scroll to execute. And then when I execute with OK or use exe, you can see that the table is populated. So I now have a column for the value of f of x and also for g of x. I'm interested in evaluating f of 2.5. Now I only went up in integers. So I could add that, and that is as simple as before, where I can just enter the value 2.5 somewhere in the x column. And if I execute, it reevaluates so that you can see that f of 2.5 is -1.75 and g of 2.5 is 3. Okay. However, again, there is an alternative way of approaching this. Within Calculate, I can use the function key, but this time recall f of x and evaluate it at 2.5. So now I'm doing f of 2.5. And if I execute, I get the value -7/4. Now, this is because I have the default settings math input, math output. I could have used shift and execute to give me a decimal approximation to begin with. But if I introduce you to the format key, you can see that in addition to changing between standard and decimal, so the upgraded functionality of S to D, it also now gives me the choice of improper fractions or mixed fractions. If I scroll down to mixed fraction, for example, and choose OK, you can see that it has reevaluated and displays the answer as -1 3/4. So that is quite nice. So that's an example of the functionality of format. Just to show you that format is, again, it's like tools. It adapts to what you are trying to achieve. If I just enter a value, for example, and then now I choose format, you can see that the menu has now changed, standard decimal as always, but now I can do prime factorization. Scrolling down and choosing with OK, factorizes my number. Okay. And don't forget that what we can attempt to do as well is evaluate g of x. So this is f dash of 2.5. So use the function key again, choose g of x, and g of 2.5 gives me the expected value of 3. Moving on, we can now attempt to solve quadratic. And we can do that on the previous model. That was by using solve. But now if we choose home, this functionality has now been placed in equation. So that you can see, as before, simultaneous equations, polynomials, and now we have solver. If we choose simultaneous equations, you can see that you would expect 2, 3, and 4 unknowns. So no change to the functionality there. If you choose polynomial, the initial screen's changed ever so slightly because it was asking you about the order before, but now it just displays quadratics, cubics. Use the back key again, and now we can choose solver. It's asking you to enter an equation. Now, I could enter the quadratic x squared subtract 2x subtract 3, but I know it's already been defined as f of x. So using the function key, I can recall f of x again, and then set it equal to 0. So that is shift, open parentheses, and 0. And then when I confirm with execute, it takes me to a screen asking for an initial value. So it's clearly asking for a value here. I put 5 and confirm with execute or OK. And then perform the calculation with OK or execute. And it gives me the left-hand root of x equals -1. If I would like to perform another calculation to try and find the right-hand root, press back, and you can change the initial value. I think it may be positive, so let's enter 4, confirm with OK, and then when I execute with OK, it finds the upper root of x equals 3. Now, you may be wanting to do something with the solutions to this equation. So we can now have a look at storing these values. So here we can use the variable Okay. And you will see that currently we have x equals 3, the value that's just been found, but also the variables a to f as before. If I would like to store my value as a, I can use OK, and it's asking me to store or edit at a. I would like to store, so I choose OK, and the value 3 is now stored for the variable a. And you can confirm that by choosing variable again, where you can see a is equal to 3. If I have stored values, I may want to use them. So here we have a question now asking about the area bounded by the curve, the x-axis, and the lines x equals 2 and x equals 4. So here we have a disguised integration question. So what we can attempt to do is go back to calculate. And choose catalog. Now, integration is within functional analysis, as you would expect. I can choose that. And I can attempt to perform an integration. If I'm interested in finding the area, what I have to do is use a certain type of calculation. So I need to add a negative area to a positive area because I know my function crosses the x-axis within my range. So what I'm going to do is perform an integration. Now I could integrate my quadratic, but again, why not use f of x? So using the function key, let's recall f of x. At this point, I can use shift and left, and that moves the cursor all the way past your function. So if you had entered, say, quartic, that scrolls past all 5 terms. If I scroll to the right now, it goes to the upper limit. Now, the upper limit for the negative area is my variable a, so let's use shift and 4. So you can see where it is labeled a. If I scroll down, my lower limit is 2. And then when I evaluate, I get a negative value, which I was expecting as it is a negative area. However, if I was attempting to find the area at this point, I need to add some values together. So why not combine operations? So to do that, what I can do is use catalog and then scroll to numeric. And you will see here that I can actually choose the absolute value or the modulus of a function. If I choose that, I can now add the modulus of the value just calculated. So now I can use the answer key and scroll outside the modulus, and then I can add the value of another area. So let's add another integral. So this will be the integral for the positive area, the one above the x-axis. So you can go to catalog again, functional analysis, scroll down and choose integral. So again, I can integrate my function f of x. Shift and scroll left and then right. But my upper limit is now 4. My lower limit is now a. And then when I evaluate, I get the combined area, which is 4. Okay. At this point, I can show you the new features of the emulator, which is housed within ClassPad. If I expand ClassPad, so this is the online platform where Casio hosts their emulators. Hopefully I can now demonstrate that it can actually create sticky notes for what you have just done. But if we go to Home and Table, notice the table is blank because I exited table mode previously. If I would like to populate it, let's go to Tools and Table Range. Let's go from -5 to 5 again. And execute. It populates my table, but now ClassPad enables you to do something else. It can actually draw the graphs of your functions. So here we have my quadratic, but also my derivative. So that allows you to make comparisons between the two. But if you actually choose one of the functions, it will find the relevant points for you. So here you've got the roots, the vertex, the intercepts. So for example, I've got the root 30, but it also quite nicely can perform functions for you. So it can actually integrate. So for example, if we integrate between 2 and 3, it finds my negative area, which was -5/3. But again, it tells you that it is +5/3. Or if I edit that slightly to change between the limits 2 and 4, it highlights both of the areas, integrates to 2/3 and finds the area of 4. So quite useful within the classroom. If we now go back to having a little look at the handset, we can look at some frequency data. So Home and Stats. As before, 1 and 2 variable are your choices. For 1 variable, you would get your default single X column. If you wanted to turn frequency on, you would use Tools. You could scroll down, choose with OK, and turn the radio button on. Go back, and you get your frequency column, and you can enter your data as you would normally. Scroll down and to the right to go to the top of the frequency. So you have your data. What you may want to do is actually do something to it. So finding the summary values, you can press OK. And that gives you the choices that you may be expecting. 1 variable results and statistics count. 1 variable results with OK will give you your list of summary stats, so X bar, sum of X, and so on. Use page scroll to page scroll down to your quartiles, for example, and down again to your maximum. If you would like to go back to your results, you can choose back to go to your data, and then OK. What if you want to use these summary values? Scroll down to Stats Calc. OK, and you get to your 1 variable stats screen, which should again be familiar. At this point, you can access those not by using Option as before, but now by using Catalog. And you will see that Statistics has now been placed at the top of your catalog menu, so above functional analysis. If you choose stats, you can now access all the values you may be interested in, so summation, means, min, max, and so on. So let's scroll down to mean, choose OK, and you can recall your X bar, your S of X, your sigma X, and so on. Additionally, within stats mode, you can use paired regression data. Exit by going back. And then instead of one variable, scroll down to OK with 2 variable. This will clear all your existing data. So select that with OK. And at this point, you get the XY columns as well as frequency. I don't want the frequency, so use tools. Again, scroll down, and you can turn frequency off. If I choose back, I get my XY columns. So again, enter your data. These 3. And then your Y data. And once you have entered your data, you can press OK. And as you may have guessed, you can now use catalog and statistics. And scroll down to your regression choices. Here you can access A, B, R, and also X hat and Y hat. Moving on from from statistics to distribution, we can now have a look at, say, performing a calculation for the normal distribution. Using home, I can scroll right to distribution. Main thing that you will notice here is that the upgraded handsets now have a binomial first, whereas previously it was normal first. If I scroll down to normal CD and OK, I can enter my lower bound and upper bound. Well, my lower bound for this question is 11.2. I can use OK or execute to confirm the value. My upper bound needs to be suitably large, bearing in mind the standard deviation is 1.3, something along the lines of 20 should be all right. And you will notice that mu is now the first value to be entered. And if we scroll down, you can see that sigma is next. So this is another main change. Previously, it was sigma, then mu. So this is more in line with the way that the distribution is defined. So mu is 10.7 and sigma is 1.3. And then I can execute and I get the value. And if I wanted to, I could save that to a variable as well. But if we want to take things ever so slightly further, such as for complex numbers, I can go to home and then scroll down to complex. The R at the top of the screen indicates it is A plus BI format. If I want to find that my magnitude direction of 1 plus root 3, square right from underneath the radical, I can use Shift and 9 to enter I. Okay. Or there is an alternative. I can use catalog. And because I'm in complex node, notice that complex has been placed at the top of the menu structure now. Okay, and I could use that to enter I. Okay. If I enter, one of the things I could do to find the magnitude direction is, for example, I can now use format. So standard and decimal, as you would expect. But I can also scroll down to polar and choosing OK there. If I was in degrees, it would be 2 and an angle of 60 degrees. In radians, it is 2 and an angle of pi over 3. Okay, so a nice way of using format. Alternatively, though, what you can do is within Calculate, I can use Catalog and scroll down to Angle. If I choose that, in addition to degrees, radians, gradients, you will notice it's got rectangular to polar. So what I can do now is enter my complex number as 1, square root of 3. Scroll out from under the radical and close the parentheses. And when I execute, notice it does give me R and theta. So not as a fraction this time, but as a decimal. And one of the nice things about this is, of course, is that if you choose a variable, those values are automatically stored as X and Y. Finally, what I can do is demonstrate some of the features of the 83 and 85. I know we've been looking at 991CW mostly. If I then change emulator to the 8385, the functionality for the handsets improves from the 8385 to the 991, obviously, because they are GCSE models and the 991 is the A-level model. However, the menu structure is the same, as you can see. Main differences between the handsets, though, are within Calculate. If you choose Catalog, we've already had a look at function analysis and probability. Within Numeric, we saw that the 991 had absolute value. The 83 and 85 also have GCD, so divisor and LCM multiplier, but it also has recurring decimal. Okay, and this is quite nice. So, for example, if I was going to enter a value, so it just demonstrates I've got 1 point something. If I now use, Numeric, I can now enter sort of 1.3 recurring. And if I execute, it provides it as a fraction. Okay, I can use format if I want, and page scroll if I wanted an improper or a mixed fraction. But notice we've also got recurring decimal, so I can choose that, and it will turn it back into recurring decimal. Also on the 83 and 85, if I look at the home, all handsets have got this app called MathBox. If I choose that, you will see that this is where you can simulate dice rolls and coin tosses. So the 991 also has this, but the 83 and 85 also have a number line and circle available. So number line allows you to draw number lines for inequalities or equalities, for example. So let's do a less than 3, for example, and maybe do a greater than 5. And we can draw, and now I can have a look at the number line. One other feature that we have is in Math Box, we have a circle. And this is quite nice because you can examine unit circles, half circles, or a clock. So if you scroll to clock, for example, you can then have a go at identifying the angles in degrees or radians. Okay, so some of the nice features of the 83 and the 85 and the differences between the 991. So hopefully you found this useful. Please have a look at the website education.casio.co.uk, where there are further resources available. So some videos and some leaflets describing more functionality of the handset. Thank you very much.